When a nuclear submarine ends its useful life, it is not enough to turn off its systems and moor it in a port. Its reactor remains the central problem. Inside that compartment remain materials activated by years of radiation, contaminated structures, special shielding, cooling circuits, and above all, spent fuel that must be removed under extreme safety standards. The decommissioning of one of these vessels is not a simple task of naval recycling. It is an industrial, radiological, and logistical operation of enormous complexity. The process can take years. First, the reactor is emptied and the immediate nuclear risk is reduced. Then the most dangerous compartment is physically separated from the rest of the submarine. Then comes the longest phase, decontaminating, cutting, classifying, and repurposing the enormous steel hull that was once a strategic weapon. Nuclear engineers, crane operators, radiation protection specialists, welders, metallurgists, and environmental control teams intervene in this journey. The objective is not just to dismantle an old submarine. The true objective is to prevent that reactor, designed for war and survival underwater, from becoming a problem for several generations. Everything starts with the reactor. While the submarine was in service, that core was its source of energy, the heart that powered propulsion, electrical systems, internal air conditioning, and an essential part of its strategic autonomy. But when the vessel is taken out of service, that same heart becomes the main risk. The submarine is moved to a facility prepared for nuclear work. It is not treated like an old ship, but as a contaminated structure that still contains materials capable of emitting intense radiation. The dock, the access points, the control zones, the protection equipment, and the procedures change completely. Every move is planned with precision, because here there is no room for improvisation. The initial objective is to remove the spent fuel from the reactor. That operation is decisive. While the fuel remains inside, the submarine retains the most dangerous part of all its radioactive cargo. The fuel elements spent years inside the core under a constant bombardment of neutrons. They generated heat, sustained fission reactions, and, over time, accumulated extremely dangerous radioactive products. Although the reactor is no longer operating, these elements continue to emit radiation and residual heat. Before opening the reactor, technicians must stabilize the facility. Temperatures, residual pressures, contamination levels, structural integrity, and shielding conditions are verified. Then covers, connections, and auxiliary systems are removed to access the upper part of the reactor vessel. Everything is done with strict procedures and permanent dosimetric control. In many cases, remote tools or long-distance handling devices are used to reduce human exposure. The extraction of the fuel does not resemble removing normal mechanical parts. Each assembly must be treated as an intense source of radiation. For this reason, shielded containers, special cranes, alignment guides, and transfer systems designed to avoid shocks, tilts, or positioning errors are used. The fuel is removed slowly and passed to transport and temporary storage containers. At that stage, shielding is essential. It is not just about moving heavy material, it is about containing gamma radiation and, depending on the state of the fuel, also managing residual heat and surface contamination. The operation can last for weeks or months, not because the fuel is difficult to locate, but because each maneuver must be slow, controlled, and verified. Operators work under strict dose limits. Areas are monitored continuously. Surfaces are checked again and again to detect contamination. Around the submarine, an infrastructure is deployed that resembles a land-based nuclear facility more than a conventional shipyard. When the fuel finally leaves the submarine, the risk decreases, but it does not disappear. The reactor remains a problem. During years of service, the steel of the vessel, nearby piping, internal shielding, and part of the primary circuits received an intense flux of neutrons. That alters matter itself. Some atoms in the metal become radioactive. It is not just dirt stuck to the surface. It is the activation of the material. That means the problem is already inside the steel itself. Therefore, after extracting the fuel, the reactor is not dismantled like a diesel engine or a marine turbine. In most cases, the entire nuclear compartment is isolated as a dangerous unit. Before reaching that point, however, there is still a preliminary phase, ensuring that the submarine can be handled without the immediate risk represented by the loaded core. In practical terms, this first step redefines the nature of the vessel. Until that moment, the submarine remains a disused nuclear platform. Once the fuel is unloaded, it begins to become an object of industrial decommissioning. It remains dangerous. It still demands radiological controls, but it no longer contains the most intense and most monitored part of the entire installation. With the fuel already removed, the most symbolic and brutal stage of the process arrives, physically separating the most dangerous part of the submarine. The reactor does not travel alone. It is integrated into a complete compartment, surrounded by shielding, structures, piping, supports, control systems, and layers of protection that were part of the central architecture of the vessel. That section is not dismantled piece by piece in a handcrafted job. In many decommissioning programs, it is cut as a complete block. The reason is simple. Dismantling the reactor internally would be much slower, more costly, and more dangerous. The level of contamination and activation in that area forces direct handling to be reduced to the maximum. That is why engineers prefer to turn that sector of the submarine into a sealed capsule. It is a practical solution to immobilize the problem and move it to controlled long-term storage. First, it is precisely defined where the cuts will be made. The submarine is structurally analyzed to determine which sections must be separated in front of and behind the nuclear compartment. It is not enough to cut around the reactor. The stability of the hull, the distribution of loads, and the lifting conditions must be ensured. Each cut affects the balance of an immense structure designed to withstand oceanic pressure, not to be fragmented into blocks. The cutting crews work with high-energy equipment. Depending on the shipyard and the method used, they may use oxy-cutting, plasma, or combinations of thermal and mechanical tools. The steel of a nuclear submarine is not just any metal. These are high-strength alloys with significant thicknesses and a quality intended to withstand deep immersion, hydrostatic pressure, and extreme structural stresses. Cutting it demands power, experience, and very fine control of the process. At this stage, radiation continues to set the pace. Not all sectors of the submarine present the same risk. Near the reactor compartment, human stay times can be limited. Radiation protection teams measure doses, delimit zones, control ventilation, and supervise any material that comes loose during the cutting. It is not just about opening the steel. Dispersion of contaminated particles must be prevented, personnel protected, and every operation kept within authorized margins. Once the sections are defined, the hull is cut in front of and behind the nuclear compartment. The result is a cylindrical or nearly cylindrical section that concentrates the most sensitive part of the submarine. Then, openings are sealed, edges are reinforced, and the exposed ends are transformed into structural closures. That block becomes, in essence, a large radioactive waste contained within its own metallic shell. The image is striking. A submarine that was once a single continuous machine is left split into large sections, and in the center appears the encapsulated heart. That piece can weigh dozens or even hundreds of tons. To move it, cranes of enormous capacity, specialized barges, or heavy transport vehicles are needed. Nothing in this phase is small. Every maneuver feels like a heavy industry operation combined with a nuclear protocol. And what is done with that block? It is not sunk in the sea. It is not abandoned at a pier. It is moved to storage facilities specially intended for waste of this type. There it remains immobilized for decades and sometimes for centuries until the radioactivity of the activated materials drops to more manageable levels. It is, in a way, a technical tomb for the reactor and its immediate surroundings. Meanwhile, in the remaining parts of the submarine, another less visible but equally important battle begins: decontamination. Although the nuclear compartment is no longer attached to the hull, the rest of the vessel may still retain areas with residual contamination. Pipes, valves, exchangers, adjacent enclosures, and internal surfaces must be checked one by one. Measurements, chemical washes, selective removals of components, and cleaning treatments are performed to reduce any radioactive trace left outside the main compartment. This work is usually longer than the public imagines. The cutting of the reactor is the most spectacular scene, but decontamination is what consumes time, money, and hours of control. Surfaces must be verified, circuits cleaned, compromised parts removed, secondary waste isolated, and it must be certified that the rest of the submarine can pass to a more conventional phase of scrapping. A single hotspot detected in a weld or a microcrack can change the fate of tons of metal. The general logic is clear. What cannot become safe in a reasonable time is isolated. What can be cleaned is processed. The objective is to reduce the total volume of material that must remain under permanent nuclear custody. The more that can be correctly decontaminated and classified, the less radioactive waste remains to be stored for generations. Here, the frontier between two worlds is defined. On one side remains the reactor compartment, condemned to long-term storage. On the other, the rest of the submarine slowly begins to leave the category of nuclear object to enter that of a large, recyclable metallic structure. The reactor is already isolated. Now it remains to resolve what to do with the gigantic steel skeleton that surrounded it. Once the reactor compartment is removed, many people imagine that the rest of the work is already simple. It is not. The submarine still retains the complexity of a military machine built with special materials, thousands of meters of cabling, internal equipment, bulkheads, tanks, piping, and a pressure hull manufactured to withstand extreme conditions. Although the most dangerous part has already been separated, the process that follows continues to be slow, technical, and meticulous. The first objective is to certify which materials can be recycled and which need additional treatment. For this, radiological sweeps are performed on the remaining sections. Specialists inspect surfaces, joints, welds, structural corners, and internal components. If residual contamination appears, that part is cleaned, dismantled, or isolated. Only when a sector falls below established limits can it advance to the conventional cutting phase. Then the scrapping of the hull begins. The submarine is divided into manageable sections. It is a full-blown, heavy industry operation. High-strength naval steel does not yield easily. Thermal cutting systems, plasma, or specialized tools capable of opening thick plate and reinforced structures must be applied. The teams advance by zones, removing enormous fragments that are then transported to classification areas. At that point, one of the most interesting parts of the process appears. The steel of a nuclear submarine is not common scrap. Many of its alloys contain valuable elements for metallurgy. The pressure hull, internal structures, certain non-contaminated parts, and some auxiliary components can become useful raw material for new industrial applications, but that only happens if the controls are rigorous. No one wants material with residual contamination to enter an open recycling chain. Therefore, each batch is carefully classified. There is structural steel, alloy steels, copper from cabling, aluminum from secondary equipment, non-ferrous materials, mechanical parts, and non-recyclable waste. A considerable part of the ship can end up in metallurgical plants, where it is melted down again. It is the most paradoxical moment in the entire history. A hull designed to hide in the ocean and launch strategic weapons can end up converted into plates, profiles, or components for civil works and infrastructure. Remelting requires powerful furnaces and precise chemical control. The metal is melted, analyzed, adjusted, and transformed into new industrial products. What was once part of a sail, a bulkhead, or the pressure hull can be reborn as construction steel, machinery parts, or material for structural use. The war disappears, the alloy remains. However, that transformation is not total or automatic. Not everything is recycled. There are secondary wastes generated during cleaning, protection materials, filters, resins, technical rags, disposable equipment, contaminated pieces, and components that must be treated as radioactive waste of different categories. Those materials follow separate routes. Some are compacted, others are solidified in cement matrices or other immobilizing media, others pass to controlled storage. Decommissioning does not only produce recoverable metal, it also produces a technical heritage that must remain monitored for a long time. At a strategic scale, the scrapping of nuclear submarines is a challenge of state. It is not just about recycling steel or emptying military ports. Behind it are very high costs, environmental protocols, national security, industrial capacity, and intergenerational responsibility. A submarine can serve 30 or 40 years. Its reactor, however, may force surveillance for centuries. That is the true proportion of the problem. There is also a symbolic element impossible to ignore. During its operational life, a nuclear submarine represents stealth, deterrence, power, and permanence underwater. It is one of the most closed, most secret, and most sophisticated machines built by military engineering. But when it ages, everything reverses. It must be opened, measured, emptied, cut, and exposed to the light of the shipyard. What for decades was hidden at the bottom of the sea ends up suspended by cranes wrapped in sensors, protective suits, and safety protocols. The entire process leaves a powerful lesson. The most advanced technology does not disappear when it ceases to be useful, it simply changes problems. While a submarine is active, the challenge is to operate it in silence and keep it alive in extreme conditions. When it retires, the challenge is exactly the opposite: to deactivate it without its reactor, its activated materials, and its residual contamination becoming a lasting threat. In the end, that is what they do with the nuclear reactor of an old submarine. First, they remove the fuel. Then they isolate the most dangerous compartment as a sealed piece intended for long-term storage. Then they clean, cut, and recycle everything that can re-enter industry without risk. What cannot be recycled is immobilized and monitored. There is no quick solution, no simple gesture, only a long sequence of engineering, radiation protection, metallurgy, and patience. Thus, the submarine ceases to be a war machine, but it does not disappear immediately. Its reactor enters a much slower time, a time measured not in patrols or years of service, but in decades of custody and in centuries of prudence.